Hello, everybody. My name is Ian Kirkpatrick. I'm an author, idiot, and loin streamer, and today we're going to discuss some of the things that you guys have said because, bruh. Bruh! Now, before we get started, number one, if you enjoy what I do here on the channel, please remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Number two, if you would like to be featured on the channel, check out the links down in the description below. The number one way to be featured is through Lemoy, the monthly prompt writing contest, where I give you a prompt. You write a short story using that prompt, and on the first Monday video of the month, we bask in your creativity. The second way to be featured is if you are an indie author and you have a book out or a book that is coming out. If you submit the first chapter and the cover, that first chapter will be read here on the channel to hopefully help more readers find your work. Might be me, might be you, might be them. We'll see. It's all up to you to impress and shine with your first impression. The third thing is, if you would like to check out any of my books or support me, they're available at any of your favorite places to get books, including the local library upon request. My newest novel, Bodymore Zero, came out in October, and there are other ways to support, like giving tips or becoming a member if you would like to support that way. And then last thing that I will add is if there are any topics that you would like me to cover here on the channel, there is a link down in the description to submit a topic for discussion here. If there is anything that you see that you would like me to try to give an opinion on within reason, within the wheelhouse. I am not a genius. I am an individual idiot. But that means that I will put out my airy opinion and thoughts in order to have conversation. And sometimes, the quickest way to get information is to be wrong. So over the last, I don't think it was the whole year, but some point last year, I just started, posting random questions on my community tab. I mean, I'm sure that you saw them. And that came about because I feel like I was reading something that reminded me of a Jeffrey Dahmer related question. And that's what started all of it, is I threw out a question. And then I was definitely reading something nonfiction. I'm feeling it was criminal related. And I just had questions. And I first dropped them on Twitter, but I don't have very many followers on Twitter. So I was like, you know what? I could drop this on YouTube and see if anybody on YouTube answers the questions. And so then every time I just came up with some random kind of question, I was dropping them on here, sort of timing them out though, so it would only be two or three a week. But I wanted to see answers, and specifically to enable conversation. And so some of the questions were very extreme, very extreme. And most of them, obviously, because it was a poll most often, were very closed in. So you had very specific answers that you could give. And that was in part because you only have 65 characters you can use and 4 answers max within the polls. So you're very limited anyway. Polls also tend to have less nuance, but I also wanted to draw a line that would encourage people to express themselves, to give more nuance, to give more opinion, to define things further. And so then you get that by having answers that people will want to clarify so that you understand where they lie, even if there is a poll. And also, people are more likely to answer polls than open-ended questions where there is no poll, so then you get better numbers by using polls. So that was part of my mindset behind it. And we're gonna discuss some of the questions, what prompted some of the questions, if I remember what those questions are, and go over some of the answers just in general. I'm not gonna argue with anybody because this is not a space for arguing ideas or arguing against people, because I also think that for at least the case where how I'm doing this or why I'm doing this, if I sit up here and argue with people's opinions or perspectives, it totally defeats the purpose of even doing this, because it will discourage people from sharing their opinions on the fact that, hey, I might argue with you. So I'm not going to argue. I'm going to try not to argue with anybody. But note that even no matter what, you've got your opinions, I've got my opinions, and I want to say that we can respectfully just have our different opinions. And the most important thing for what I started to do with this series of just asking these questions was to show the difference of opinions, of perspectives, of existences, because I think that it gets really easy because we're looking at people and we're speaking similar languages, the same language, using similar words most of the time, but sometimes we use those words in very different ways and we don't even realize it because the words are the same word, but we have different baggage behind the word. I find myself in conversations often where we're both using the same word, but we're talking past each other somehow still, because we either have different emotional baggage or different definitions or different emotions related to words. And I think about this all the time because I think some of my biggest conflicts within personal relationships has been because we were using different words and I didn't feel like we were actually talking to one another. And it matters more to me that you can dislike me all you want. Please do. If you do, you can feel free to dislike me. However, I find it valuable, the most valuable, that at least if you're going to dislike me, at least know what I'm saying. I prefer to be understood and then you can dislike me anyway versus not being understood. And I feel like maybe that's not the majority of people, but so I try to clarify and I try to get on the same page as other people because I know how important I find it to find myself being understood by whoever I'm talking to. And so I also try to give the respect of understanding the position that other people are coming from. And I know that sometimes when you ask questions to clarify where people are coming from, it can come across as like you're trying to get them in a gotcha, because I think that social media has also trained us so much to be prepared for other people trying to make a fool of us or us having to try to make a fool of somebody else to get a one up. It kind of makes interacting with people also very scary because you don't know how somebody is approaching you. And then the first thing that you get is snarkiness and you're like, I have had quite a few interactions where it's just like either the response to a video that I've put out has just immediately been snarky when I really try to just be earnest in what I say and to try to maybe I make jokes, maybe I laugh, but I'm not trying to make fun of anybody. I want to try to connect with people, to try to have conversation, because I feel like it gets lost a lot because I feel like there is so much blood sporting about like try to make yourself bigger by making somebody else look stupider. And so I want that human connection. And so that's what I try to do with the questions. And that's what I try to do with responses. And even I've had times where somebody comes in and I feel like they're being aggressive at me. And so then I kind of be snarky back. And then you immediately start getting in that thing and you're like, this is not what I meant to do. Oh no. I remember a couple of years ago, I did a video talking about like some of the things that I like. It was like a survey that I just did upon myself. It was like an author survey that I did for a video. And I said what some of my interests were. And I said that I had a specific interest in male psychology because I was studying I was studying psychology and interested in working in that field, which I have a master's degree in forensic psychology. Am I working in that field? I'm not really pursuing it right now. I could be, but I'm not. But somebody then goes, oh, you have an interest in male psychology. Why do you hate women? And then everything from that person just turned into assaulting me when I never said anything remotely like that. And so there are so many instances of like stuff being taken in the worst possible way instead of actually allowing conversation to be had. And there's no way that you can have conversation with anybody if people assume everything that you say is aggressive. So I try to do these conversations, and even in a lot of the videos, there are a couple of things that I'm just like, no, I will draw hard lines for myself in my space. I'm not going to go after other people in their spaces with their interests. But if you ask me about certain things in my space, I will be straightforward with you. Most of the time, sometimes to a fault. But that's pretty much it. Is just because I ask for people's opinions doesn't mean that I'm I'm open-minded about everything, that I'm willing to have my opinions change, but I am willing to hear people out. However, I can also have strong opinions against things and not feel like it's worth pursuing a conversation in something if we are so far apart in it. Like, I do have certain things that people are like, I don't want to discuss anarchy with anybody. I'm not interested. I got that Michael Malice book, and that's probably the furthest that you're going to hear me talk about freaking anarchy whenever I get to it. But I don't want to talk about it with people. If you want to believe in that and you want to do that thing, fine. I'm not going to engage in it because theoretically it really shouldn't affect me because we don't run an anarchy. And otherwise, you believe what you want to believe. Have at it. But I'm going to respectfully step away from that conversation. So anyway, I wanted to go over some of the polls that I have had over the last couple of months, discuss some of the interactions with you guys, some of the answers that you guys gave, and the interest in it, because I think that it is incredibly interesting, the way that people answer and perceive and interpret the same exact question. With that said, let's jump into the first. I picked a very specific one to be first. Otherwise, we're going to just kind of go through these and see what happens. But there were two that I wanted to talk about first. Number one was this question of how do you define bigotry? This is one of the few questions where I did not give a poll. And I find this specifically interesting because every single comment has a different definition for the word bigotry. Every single one. And the only one that actually had the actual dictionary definition of bigotry was called an idiot. So we're gonna look at these really quick because it's very interesting. Feckoff, the PR villain, says bigotry is believing something based off of prejudiced opinion without actually looking into the more intimate details and just assuming that you're right without trying to be certain. Something like that. A Mary Wolf said voting incorrectly. Mary I 685 said prejudice built on ignorance and often sense of superiority devoid of critical thinking, a blind belief. Spooky first said bigotry. It doesn't reason, it's rooted in emotion, and its poison can become generational depending on who's more efficient with propaganda. It others all things it perceives to be wrong or deprives it of power. Bigotry hates those who love. It cannot stand those who refuse to fear, and it'll do all it can to destroy whatever threatens it. It's cowardly. It doesn't like being seen for what it is, and it'll do anything to stay hidden as long as it can. When discovered, it'll loudly blame the discoverer as being the true bigot, believing the whole time that repetition of a lie will win if repeated long enough. The one thing a bigot hates above all things, being proven to be one. Chicky said, to be honest, I don't know. It translates to Spanish as fanatism and intolerance, which are two completely different things. Bobby said, to me, bigotry is the individual reinforcement of systemic racism, essentially a person who entrenched themselves into believing in very dangerous and harmful rhetoric that is then reinforced by a system, both directly and indirectly. Gustav Dorr says personal, often underlying bias against specific group or groups of people different than your own, most often a group that has a less fortunate standing in society that you live in. In most cases, the biases that you have isn't based on your own experience, but on the belief that is inserted on you. T. Alex Ratcliffe says, in modern context, a slur used to silence opponents of a political nature. Archaic, a belief held to the detriment of another group formed on incorrect information. Matty OTX says, bigotry is nothing more than intolerance of others who believe or are different from oneself. Intolerance is not the same as disagreement. Disagreements occur when both sides have presented an argument and the logic of said argument is not accepted by the other party. Bigotry does not tolerate disagreements, which is why it leads people into bubbles and echo chambers. Which Dylan Devine said this is a foolish definition, and Maddie said it's the literal definition. What are you talking about? Bigotry is literally the intolerance of something different. It's not foolish just because you don't know the definition or disagree with it. Then the last answer that came for this post was Mirai Kimura saying generalizing or forming a bias based on negative experiences or secondhand opinions, essentially confirmation bias towards groups or people that result in generalizing. So those were all individual definitions of bigotry, and I found it incredibly interesting that every single one of them had a different definition to them. And not only that, but many of them seemed personally informed by experiences in some ways. Not all of them, but many of them do. And that's also something that informs our usage of words, which is one of the things I find very interesting about etymology and even just the way that we use words in conversation. I've had so many interactions with people. So if this ever happens to you, if we're in conversation at some point, if this ever happens between us and I stop and I go, okay, what do you mean by that? Or I try to give a definition, it's so that we're on the same page to figure out what we're talking about. Because I have this happen so often where we're using the same word, but there are emotions behind it. And it's not generally done with malice. It just happens. I remember one of the situations I had with somebody in my life that we both were using the same word or the same phrase, and they had put a lot of emotional attachment to a phrase that I had no emotional attachment to, that they saw something insulting behind that phrase that I didn't. And so we ended up having not an argument, but we ended up having a disagreement and getting kind of emotional about it because we were talking about different things but using the same words, and one of us had unknown to the other emotional baggage on the word and the other did not, and so then it was just causing this rift. And so it's so difficult, and I think it gets so easy to start going at each other, to assume the emotion, to assume the approach on things. but there's also no way to get into a deeper place or a better understanding if you're going to assume malice, if you're going to assume anger, and you're not going to try to understand where the other person is coming from. And this happens so often that it just slams the door shut on any understanding. It's, no, you're a bad person. I don't know how I'm supposed to take that, but you're a bad person. Well, if you already think that I'm a bad person, or whoever you're talking to is a bad person, how do you recover from that? You have to give the benefit of the doubt. And that's also a scary thing, because giving the benefit of the doubt enables you specifically to be vulnerable by either making you trust somebody that can hurt you, or that can be deceiving you and trying to trip you up in other things, because just as you have to trust them, they have to trust you. And it's scary. Conversation is scary. Human relationships are scary. Language is interesting because we use the same words all the time, and then we all put different weight behind them, even with punctuation. So that's just interesting. The next one that I wanted to start off with, that I personally picked us to start off with, was the question, is empathy real? And so you'll see from this, where it's 623 votes, 5% said no, and 2% said other, and then you've got the 92% that said yes. Now, the important thing is there's a comment in here that's like, are you stupid? Of course empathy is real. Okay. The important thing in this question and asking this question for me is that it doesn't matter that the super majority of people believe that empathy is real, because the majority of people you run into will either believe that they're empathetic or will be empathetic to some extent. Empathy is very difficult, because especially when you're talking to somebody who is vastly different than you in ways that you disagree with, and or they've done things and you're still trying to figure out how to be empathetic with them, or you don't think that they deserve empathy for whatever. Because some people also think that if you show empathy to somebody, then you're condoning what they've done, which that's a different conversation altogether. However, I think what was important for me to express with this questionnaire was that no matter how much you truly believe that empathy is real, there is still a small percentage of people that do not believe that is real, and you will interact with those people without even knowing it. And those people can really hurt you because they don't see a reason to care, and they don't trust your care. So as given as it might seem, because you feel a lot, I feel a lot, we all feel a lot, there are people that don't. And those people are still going to interact with you, and you won't know it. So looking over these answers, we have Rod Thunderheart. Empathy is crucial in this world. Earlich Winter said, why would empathy not exist? Is empathy controversial? Some people make it out to be more than it is, for sure. The whole I'm an empath thing is sketchy as frick, but that doesn't make empathy, cognitive or visceral, less real. R1456 said, from a neuroscience perspective, empathy is absolutely real. Just look up the mirror neurons. Empath is from woo-woo bullshit, BT dubs. I have to ask, is this a philosophical question? I think a more useful avenue would be to ask if altruism is real. And you can also dig into what compassion is. Some people think doctor-assisted suicide is compassionate. Other people find it abhorrent. I would say asking if altruism is real or compassion is real would be a different question as to whether empathy is real. But it can be a philosophical question. But if you look at even the question, there's still 5% that say no, it is not real. Also, how would you define altruism? Because then you've got to get into, are you the Randian perspective, the non-Randian perspective? Fatally Parasocial says, is it weird that I usually feel empathy but not sympathy? I don't know. I don't know what the empathy to sympathy ratio is and what's considered regular or not regular. Biting Comics says, there's a book called Science of Evil by Simon Baron Cohen, Sasha's brother, who's a psychologist, and he explains the empathy circuit of the brain and how evil is actually an issue with the circuit causing a lack of empathy. Now then the question for that is, do you think that somebody who lacks the mental circuitry for physiological empathy is doomed to be evil? Are they just born evil? Are they born without a choice in the matter? A Darker Glow says, the definition I've heard for the difference between sympathy and empathy is, sympathy, you can feel bad for someone because of their situation or emotional response. Empathy is when you can relate to a person's situation or emotional response, but know what their empathy is when you can relate to a person's situation or emotional response, know what they're going through, as it were, usually because you've experienced it previously or something similar. Ginger Jesse Talk says, yes, but empaths aren't, at least not in the sense that most people think of it as. Is Bobby says, it is real, even if you can barely feel it nowadays. The point is to use it. Kayla Alexander says, yes, but what people call empathy is actually compassion. Blue Cannibal Eyes says, nah, it's just a word to use to shame people for not reacting a certain way. Fairly Floss says, empathy is real, but the internet has destroyed it. Empathy is weaponized and used to guilt trip people and ostracize people. See, we're getting like some personal experiences in these responses, which is also something that I love a lot about these questions, is like there's so much revealed in the way that people answer questions, like how they tackle where the definition comes from. I think it's the most interesting thing. Rainy Feathers says, yep, it just depends on an individual what to do with it. Stoned and Bookish says, yes, people who insist they're an empath bug me though. For some people, empathy is learned rather than natural, i.e., neurodivergent people, intellectual disabilities, those who are sheltered as kids, and that's okay. Empathy is a real thing, but for some, it's not natural. Freddy the Platypus says, empathy is real, but it's become, albeit replaced slash upstaged by virtue signaling, and so now when someone says that they care about something or someone, it becomes actually about themselves more than actually the thing itself. If you remove the incentive for the person to benefit somehow from their feelings, from their feelings, you get real empathy. Ash, Sun, and Drock says empathy is real in so much that it's the description of a behavior, but I don't think that there's empathy essence, if that's what you mean. I have never heard of the phrase empathy essence before. Days Slays says, I believe empathy is real, but I wish that there was more distinction in conversations around it between cognitive empathy, recognizing someone's emotions, contextualizing them based on your own experiences, responding appropriately, learn skills, and visceral empathy, literally feeling echoes of what other people feel, inherent trait. Depending on how you define empathy, what I'm describing as cognitive empathy could be called sympathy slash compassion instead. I have good cognitive empathy, but barely any visceral empathy. I have friends whose visceral empathy is so strong that it actually interferes with healthy emotional functioning, and I think empathy exists on a spectrum. Raynor Chen says, evolutionarily it makes sense, but it should be more of how the brain processes subtle cues from other people. It is definitely a skill that one could master as well, but it's unlikely as magical or morally compelling as many claim. Mercy Cunningham says, yes, but in these days it tends to F you. Too many selfish people taking advantage. Wakielian. Empathy is real, but the acquisition of empathy is not common. Not nearly as common as people would like to believe. What most call empathy is confused with sympathy. And there are so many more answers, so I'm going to leave it there. All of the questions that we're going to go over today will be still in my community tab if you want to explore them, answer them yourself if you haven't answered them. So please feel free to, and you can even answer them in this video in the comments down below, so that we can still converse on like these different subjects and these different questions, and even some of the answers that were given, and converse with some of those. The next question that is listed here was, is there a benefit to being kind? 4% said there is no benefit. 92% said yes, and then 4% said kindness is a manipulation tool. So that's almost a 1 in 10 chance that somebody does not believe kindness is beneficial. So again, we have a super majority that there is a benefit to kindness, whether it's, personal benefit of just like putting good out into the world, a personal benefit of clapbacks, a person, like any sort of personal benefits, but you still have a 1 in 10 chance almost of running into somebody who doesn't believe there's a benefit to kindness, or believes the only benefit to kindness is to manipulate somebody, so they don't really believe in kindness either. That's interesting. And again, you can believe that it is perfectly normal and that majority of people you run into will be kind. But if you run into a situation where you're like, why would they do this? Or how much you don't understand another person, it could be that it is that one kind of person that you just really don't get. The 2012 Ace Man said, good rewards in the long term, evil in the short term. Problem is, most people aren't in it for the long term anymore. Gonna be hard to convince them to play nice. Jim Schuler says, kindness as opposed to niceness. Look at the root word, kind, which shares etymology with kin. You are treating someone as family, which assumes a certain level of care and not simply being agreeable. It includes the possibility of being harsh for the other's own good. Being cruel to be kind is a thing. Parents imposing discipline is a form of kindness to the child. Niceness, meanwhile, etymology traces itself to the Latin nisus, or ignorance. To be nice originally meant to be foolish. Today, someone who is foolish is readily taken in by another's niceness. The relationship remains even if the actors have flipped. Niceness is a surface level facade. Altrantis says, to kindness, yes. To actual goodness, selfishness, or restitude, Rectitude? No. Cyrus Legion says yes, because we live in a society and it is mutually beneficial to be kind to the other people. Goliath Jerfishes says kindness is a manipulation tool. Sounds beneficial to me. Hominus Nocturnus says the short answer is the benefit is you're not a piece of crap. The long answer is too deep and profound. Almost. You gotta go in and pull it out like that movie with the thing that came out of the stomach of the man with all of the people on a spaceship. May he rest in peace. Isn't that Alien? Lorette says, yeah, look at DeGeneres. She lost all of her credit and destroyed a career once people realized she was all talk. Chag says, game theory suggests cooperation until someone wrongs you. Being maximally kind and forgiving is a recipe for failure. Which, yeah, when you're going to run into people, like, again, 1 in 10 almost of people not believing in kindness and then coming at you. And Ziffy, people that say no are always the ones that think that they're better than others. Wesley Thomas, kindness is just treating someone how you'd like to be treated. Dylan Devine, in Catholic Christianity, love is defined as willing the good of another for their own sake. We see this theme play out in Scripture when Christ says to his apostles, greater love hath no one than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. There is, of course, some temporal reward of treating others with kindness, such as securing your own goodwill towards you. However, there are many cases where it is no worldly reward for kindness, but even still, there will be a spiritual reward for, say, giving alms to the ungrateful, such as when Saint Catherine of Siena devoted her time to treating a peasant woman with breast cancer who hated her. Despite the peasant woman being cruel and ungrateful, Catherine's persistence in helping her was an act of selfless kindness that most people are not willing to do. Do note, kindness and niceness are not remotely the same thing. Being nice is merely being inoffensive, but there is often a spinelessness to niceness. For example, stopping to help someone on the side of the road to change their tire in the middle of a snowstorm, that is kindness. But how many people who act nice would just go on driving by? Game Master says, I've seen people who would start smiling whenever I came by simply because I would ask them how their day was going whenever I saw them. I don't get it personally because people don't typically do it for me, but I see how it makes others feel, and that's enough. Wylan Weber says, kindness as a manipulation tool sounds like toxic gaslighting, and I'm trying to remember how my family I cut off brought up kindness to me before, but they did say something like this, and I need to go to therapy to figure this out and then fucking write about it because I bet it'll be a banger. I hope that you have written about it. It's been 5 months. We better have a short story by now. Rainy Feather says, yes, kindness never fails me. Sometimes people did, though, but it goes with the territory. It shouldn't be a mark against kindness. Neither should people misusing kindness for personal gain or gratification, in my opinion. I'm kind for the other people's sake because they need the kindness, not because I'm a good person. So in general, most people will say, at least the most people on this channel believe in kindness. I should say most visitors to this channel believe in kindness. Okay, so the next one is, which of these is the worst thing to be called? Sexist, racist, bigot with 6%, abusive with 17%, homophobe or transphobe with 1%, creep, pervert, or predator with 72%, and weirdo/freak with 3%. This is interesting to me. It like shows how people are approaching words, or like I feel like what this is assuming like mentality behind picking an answer, but I feel like in some cases looking at these might also come with what is most likely to personally affect somebody's life and what is also like in a real way. And I feel like a lot of people would have pervert or predator. Like predators are that is a claim that can ruin your life, especially if you are an actual predator. But it obviously false claims can also like mess you up. But I feel like, I mean, all of these could, depending on your situation, what the situation is. But it's interesting the ones that people picked at. I want to see what some of these answers were. An actual slur, maybe. So a slur would be worse than any of those things, personally. The Soothe Bell says, all bad, but how could you possibly think being sexist is worse than being a predator? Yeah, it would be interesting to get people like the answer that they picked and like why that one is the one that stood out to them, because there's going to be a personal reason behind every one of these answers. As someone who gets into arguments, often predator is not something that you can really depin around. It's just like the argument equivalent of throwing a cinder block at someone. Very big, fucked up accusation. Sherman says, being called a phobe or ism/ist is pretty much lost all meaning and weight due to how much it's mindlessly thrown around these days. That's true. It kind of just, you can't even have a basic conversation and you say anything and it's just like, well, not anything. You say a lot of things and it's like, how are we going to talk about anything if you get name called for anything that you do? Dang lost my souls says, honestly, all of them. It just depends on the context and location. Online, I believe gift still somewhat reigns supreme. What does a gift mean? And since there is such a flippant attitude in how these terms are used, most name calling is meaningless. A lot are hurled about too liberally for me to take seriously, especially on social media, where people will purposefully take things set out of context and then try to use them as a gotcha against their perceived targets to make them look hateful, bigoted, phobic, etc. It's also funny because people will take stuff that are in books and then assume that kind of stuff from characters that are supposed to be written like that onto the author. And like, there's truth in books from the perspective of the author in the books, but it's not always like one for one of like obvious. Like, dissecting books and what parts of the books are the author and what part are like influenced with the author's perspective, it's a very complicated subject that I don't want to get into. But people will nitpick stuff out of a book, a description of a character, and then assign it some value that was never assigned to it before. IRL, if this is the one I'm more concerned about, since one of these labels can have further reaching consequences. All of these can and happily will be used against you to destroy your life, whether they can use it as a bully, whether they are used as a bullying/conforming tactic in social circles, from somebody making a call to the HR department saying so-and-so did something racist, sexist, bigoted, abusive, predatory. The motives can be unfathomable and the incentives many. I know the age-old adage of sticks and stones, but in real life, these types of words can have a big impact on the rest of your personal life. In particular, I think the word that can do the most potential harm would be predator. But again, it depends on the situation and the context. All in all, I have a lot of thoughts regarding this. Personally, I think that it's fair to have a lot of thoughts regarding this, because I think it's a very, they all matter, but it depends on the situation. But predator specifically like tells people or infers to people that you're going after victims that are helpless. Like, predator specifically evokes the idea of an innocent and vulnerable prey. Artists and Goodies says, being called them isn't as bad as the implication of doing those things, but being called a groomer is frequently a tactic of conservatives to intentionally harm queer people by labeling them as aggressors. Froggy Coloring says, I'd much rather be a little weird than a literal predator or someone who hates people for just their identity. Loco Video says, I think gay is worse. Hominis Nocturnus says, creep, pervert, predator, because creep encompasses all of the other categories in the list. That's true. Nicholas says, I'm South African, so racist would be the top of the list, followed by misogynist, appalling GBV here. Being called weird is something I would laugh at. Personally, I call myself weird. I'm like, look, I know. Lady Lemon says, in this day and age, you're pretty much screwed for life socially if someone even suggests you're homophobic/transphobic. But predator is much worse because people have been game-ended over those accusations. Probably a slur is another one. These are serious accusations other than weird and freak obvi. Spooky First says, irony, predators often accuse the people that they prey on of being all of the above. The Rocky Gamer says, definitely a predator. That's the worst in a sense. And I sure wouldn't want to be called a racist or a homophobe or homophobic either, though. DPO says, it completely depends on who is calling the name. There are some types who speak these names who can say so safely and ignore anything else they say. So this one says, is it okay to spread lies about someone as long as they are deemed a bad person? 2% said yes, 98% said no. Now, what specifically inspired this question, was that somebody asked me, or was talking to me, somebody was talking to me about Jeffrey Dahmer, and one of the books that is about Jeffrey Dahmer, it was the comic book. And I said that something in there was not real. I said I hated that book because of how much false information is in it. And pointed out specifically like where he taught where the classmate talked about Jeff harming animals. But if you actually know Jeffrey Dahmer's background, he never actually tortured any animals. None of the animals that he collected, he actually killed. He only picked up roadkill and animals that were already dead to do his like not taxidermy, but to do his preservation with. Is he was one of the people, one of the specific things about him that made him different from other serial killers is that he never had a history of animal abuse. And he actually had a pet dog that he really, really loved. And he lost the dog when they moved away. I think they had to give it away, if I remember it correctly. I'd have to look at that background again. But he never abused animals. So that was in that book. And when I said that that was a falsehood, and then the person looked it up and confirmed that that was a falsehood, they were like, oh, well, who cares anyway, because he was a bad person, and who cares if bad people lie? So that's what, or if you, and who cares if you lie about bad people? And so that's where that came from. But so then my opinion on the entire thing was, if you prove that you'll lie about someone that you don't like, why should anybody believe what you say? But in general, I have a very strong opinion towards lying, because if you prove that you will continually lie to somebody's face about anything, like why should they bother listening to you about anything? Why should they talk to you? Is if you want the integrity, your integrity to not be questioned when you're giving information, then you have to build a background of being trustworthy. A bad person's actions speak for themselves. Seriously, Tony says, if you're doing the wrong things and it's reported or recorded by at least one unbiased source, their actions will prove how bad they really are. Like Dark Side Phil, he likes to blame his trolls for everything, but he is truly the biggest one. Kat Menace says, I have a friend who did something very bad years ago for a combination of reasons. Unaddressed trauma and PTSD, cognitive distortion that made her think that what she did was okay, developmental disabilities, making her overall maturity level lower, on impulse control worse, and she had a severe guilt complex about it. All that I ever see her do is to try and atone and move on and to be a better person today than she was then. She has never done what she did since then, and she has provided with a good therapist who has helped her fix the mindset that led her to do what she did. And while she did face legal repercussions, her sentence was very light after everything that she had her sentence was very light after everything, and the things that she was accused of turned out to be largely exaggerated, but with a grain of truth. These exaggerations and lies and more were published in the news. She sued a news company for slander, and they only took down one article because the rest was used vague language like the source says and alleged. So it's on the source and not on them. People know a much worse story than what actually happened and judge her accordingly, and I can see this come up over and over and over again. People she thought were her friends have turned on her and spread these rumors, and it's become such a big deal. Her ex-boyfriend and former friend both turned on her for extreme petty reasons and spread this to everyone they knew and exposed her further. It's a whole mess. She almost took her life when her friend did this. I went to her home every day and brought her food and took her out for walks because she was unable to leave her room. Because of the things she did, I'm sure many people would think that she's a bad person. I don't. She's one of my best friends, and I think that she was stupid and she was sick, and she healed and grown a lot. I believe everyone who genuinely commits to change and do better deserves a second chance, and nobody should have any shit spread about them that hasn't been reliably confirmed. Undead says, if they are really bad, there's no need to lie. And Biolamantis says, lying about a bad person just makes the truth less credible. So, like, where do you fall in the line of that? And this is a question. Who should control an artist's work? The artist/creative team, the investors/shareholders, the general audience, the most passionate fans, and the government or church? I'm kind of surprised the most passionate fans did not get some. I've seen so many conversations. This kind of is like kind of chill when you consider how many people have conversations on like Twitter or other social media, even the Steam forums that go, hey, I'm a real fan, and so they should listen to me. I've had people straight up say that to me as their reason for why I should be disregarded, because they go, I'm a real fan. Nobody should listen to you. They should all listen to me. And while it's great to have fans, you're not the creative team. Who was it that said something that was like, fans don't know what they want? I don't remember. But fans are also not a monolith. Interesting that the same amount say that the general audience should have it as the government or the church. That is Very interesting. As a bunch of people have pointed out already, it basically depends on who is paying for it, in my opinion. So really, all of these answers are valid, said Cody Hale YouTube. There we go. Jonash says, does it not depend on why the art exists in the first place? Like the art only exists because a company decided it should be made and that the artist only made it because they were paid to do so. Then that's the reason why it should not belong to the company that paid for it. Trope Trinity Trilogy says, I guess it depends on if it's a commission or not, but also the difficulty with art like a movie is the scriptwriter, director, actors, score writer, costume designers, etc. are all artists, so not every artist gets full control. Usually, though, I think the artist. And this is quite the... I feel like, in general, it's quite the commentary piece, but it only really happens with really big properties, because otherwise people are like, meh, anybody can, meh. It belongs to the author and the writer or whatever, and then we can just complain about it. And that seems to be the general consensus. The next one that we've got is, do you think that artists/authors can completely divorce themselves from what they create? And 87% say no, there will always be parts of the creator in their work. Yes, artwork does not have to represent the creator in any part. The Android Door says no, but I think that people treat works as far more representative of the creators than they really are. Just because someone writes about murder doesn't mean that they think murder is good. Kawaii Groovy Cat says no, because I completely and wholeheartedly condone whale boat love affairs in real life. We understand. We understand the boat whale love affairs. Glamrock Sundrop says, I create OCs like once a week, and I hate some of them. Not for the looks or anything, their behaviors, their personalities, but still their creations, my children, and I still care about them and draw them, feel empathy for them, even though I don't really like them. So yeah, there's always a part of the artist in the art, and I believe that the reason I hate some, if not most of my OCs, is because I don't like some parts of myself and my own personality. I can never destroy or completely kill a part of myself, no matter how much I hate it. It's still me. I still think it clears the connection between the art and the artist. And that's deep. I create characters I hate because I hate part of me. That is deep. Twilight Guardian says, yes, a good artist can separate themselves completely out of their work. They can create works that do not align with their beliefs or mindsets, ambitions, or anything else. Anyone who thinks otherwise is either not an artist or up their own ass, or maybe not a skilled enough artist with a confidence in their ability to be able to remove themselves. I view putting yourself in your work as some of the greenier useless. I view putting yourself in your work as some form of greenery unless done with deliberate intent. It's interesting to see the conversations around whether somebody believes that you can completely remove yourself or not from your own creation, and how much of yourself. It's a spectrum of how much people involve themselves, whether it is a self-insert or a wish fulfillment or a semi-autobiography or an inspired by autobiography / memoir fiction thing. It is very interesting, or to just kind of completely go in something very not you, but it is still going to be inspired by the way that you kind of take a direction on it, like the Jeffrey Dahmer fiction that I have somewhere I'd say in a drawer, but it's just in a folder on my computer. But obviously it's inspired by somebody else's life, and yet I still bring my perspective through the way that I write it and through the way that I present the character in the story and the trajectory of the story, because it's not like it hasn't been done plenty of other times before, but I bring a different perspective. And that's also why I constantly say your work, if you are doing it with your perspective in mind, with the way that you are writing it, with the way that you create, it will always be you that draws people in. It's not necessarily your ideas as much as the world that you create that nobody else can create. And that's what your point is for inviting people into your world. At least what I believe. Do you think women... These are spicy. These are spicy, bro. Do you think that men understand women? 15% said yes, 85% said no, which also compared to the thing that went up this morning or earlier this week that was like, do you believe that people understand you? The super majority say no, I don't think people understand me. Mink still said, nobody knows anybody, not that well. Tom Regan, Miller's Crossing. Aconite CJ says, some do, some don't. Some men understand men, some don't. It's something that shouldn't be generalized. By generalizing, we assume the particular group is a monolith, which further leads to the alienation of one group from another. Mario Soto says, men understand women as well as women understand men. Spooky Fur says, for me it's simple. Don't be an asshole. That's a basic humanity and a firm foundation for understanding. Samuel Titone said, I grew up with a lot of mixed-gendered social groups, and it was kind of a shock to find out that wasn't normal, apparently. The online dating scene with both sexes, where both sexes treat the other like these implaceable Lovecraftian entities, genuinely baffles me. Men hating women, women hating men, I don't give a damn. Shit's cringe either way. That just makes me think what would be funny is like a novella. I'm saying a novella because I'm like, I don't know if I could sustain this for a very long time, where it is like it's dating, and I'm sure it's been done. I'm sure it's not an original idea, but it's the Lovecraftian style horror, but it's really just like these depictions, because dating scene is just like, I barely understand myself. I don't expect other people to understand others at all. Same, bro. Same, Darwin Rogers. Lenegmazik says, as a woman, I can say women barely understand women. Snafu says, I don't think women even understand themselves sometimes. Janet Fennison says, I think all humans generally understand other humans pretty well, men included. However, lots of them just don't understand women are human too. The next question is there anything that you wouldn't do for money? 94% said yes, 6% said no, everything has a price. Bruh. That was going to come up with some nasty OnlyFans thing, but I don't think I actually can. Bruh. there's 6% of people that you can get to do literally anything for the right price in this audience. I'm just saying. If you take the question literally, then yes, I wouldn't cause a nuclear war for any sum of money. Hey, there are some that would. Queen Carrara says, I'd do a lot, but I'll never do anything if it harms my family, innocent animals or children. Nope, never ever. Aconite says, if I can't have love, I want money. The mailman says, I'll say it again. Poverty is a tool of control. The list of things that I would never do for money is vastly longer than the ones that I would. Black Master Joe says, I couldn't accept money if it meant someone might had to suffer as a result. Spooky First says, there is a lot I'd never do for money. Pole dancing, for instance. Dude, yeah. If it was over 1 mil, I'd do anything, honestly. Guys, you've got Froggy Coloring Sprays. Quickly, you know where to find them. Just, I think, this sort of came from discussions that I was watching, and there were a couple of questions that had to do with, like, leading up to this, because I asked a few others, and I think they're in here, but we'll see if we get to them during this video. But it had to do with, like, somebody saying, I cannot believe that you offered that person money to do this thing, because, well, they could obviously use that couple tens of thousands of dollars, so you're just taking advantage of their poverty by offering for them to do that. And then I was like, well, then where is this cutoff between somebody with money talking to somebody who has less money and being like, I'll pay you if you do this thing? So then it starts ending. So then that starts taking up this idea that you don't have free will if you want the money, but you can still determine what's more important to you between money and the thing. And I'm not saying that it's an easy conversation or it's an easy discussion, an easy determinant, but an easy thing to determine. But they could just as easily say that you don't have a right to say yes or no to work if you don't have a certain amount of money, because why would you be allowed to make that decision when you're desperate? So it's a really weird conversation, and I get the idea of saying, hey, this is used against you, but also, and money is leveraged against you, but also then that takes away any autonomy that you have for yourself. So then it comes to an idea of, like, what is free will? Do people have free will? And then that becomes a whole different can of worms to open in the idea of philosophical discussion. And some people don't believe in free will, too. Next one is, would you create something that goes against what you believe? 7% said yes, money is money. 63% said no, some things are more important than money. 22% said for the right amount of money, yes. And 8% said it's abusive to offer someone money for a service if they're poor. So, like, that continues with what I was saying before. Can you be more specific? Are we talking about writing Santa Claus to kids or making propaganda for war. Yes, it's like you have to fill in the blanks of where you would draw the line. That's why these questions are the way that they are, that you get to put in if you describe where your line is, what the line is, if there is a line, if you would never cross that line. Like, that's going to be an individual thing. Like, Chill Art Talk says, against beliefs, yes, against morals, no. That's a good answer, actually. I 100% see that distinction. And Madalena also says, yes, I think this is an important distinction. Yes, I can see that. Because I could write stories, and I do write stories with characters and people that have completely different beliefs than me, and I also write them with different morals than me, but I could not do something that is against my morals specifically. Like, I'm not going to write smut. And other people can feel free to do whatever it is that they're going to do, but I'm never going to write erotica for personal reasons. Arts and Goodies says, depends on the belief, like creating something to challenge certain beliefs as a way to question it myself and figure out more about the subject can be good. I mean, that's just personal growth. Joe H. Hardwire says, I literally did not process the question was about money before I saw the choices. I thought that it was more philosophical, like a pacifist designing a gun for their own use, or Soren creating avacyn to kill vampires. I mean, you can take it however you want to take it. T. Alex Radcliffe says, depends on the belief. I like sauerkraut, but I'd run through mud to pay off my house. The RQ Paints says, as an artist around this time, every 4 years I get told, hey, you know what you should do? Then they tell me the political joke or political situation that they thought of that morning and how it would be a great cartoon or painting that would help the side that they want to win. They have even they may even offer a few bucks for a cartoon commission painting. I will not do political art, bro. I feel it. I don't like to touch politics. I don't like to talk about politics. I'll talk about personal beliefs and morals when it comes into like conversation. I don't want to talk about politics. Politics, I don't think changes anything. Politics, I think, are irrelevant compared to individual. I think it depersons people and depersons beliefs and why we do or believe what we do or believe. The next one is, do you think that there is something that people other than you won't understand? Some things that people other than you won't understand. And 60% says yes, and that's okay. 3% said no, we need to fix that. 3% said no, any ignorance is by choice. And 33% yes, and there is a point when you just have to stop trying. And I think that 93%, that super majority, is the fairest. It makes sense. But also notice, there are some that say no and we need to fix that, or no, and it's ignorance. Think of how that is going to affect a conversation that you're having with somebody if you or they don't understand and you're crossing wires. And they're that type to look at that thing and be like, no, you should understand this situation. You should be able to understand me. And you can't. There are some things that you just can't. Tell me, have you ever run into somebody who you're talking to and it doesn't matter how well you try to explain it and the different ways you explain it, the information just is not reaching them, or it's not reaching you, and you're just like, sorry, I'm dumb. That's me every day. Plague Bears, Bob says, obviously the topic is highly subjective. Not understanding maths and sheet music, perfectly fine. Not believing something despite evidence, the flat earth example, gravity licking electric wires being bad for you, that's not really okay. But how do you prove flat earth? How do you prove Bigfoot is an interdimensional creature? Goth Vampirus says, your reality is informed entirely by your own experience. There is no other person who has had the exact same experience as you interpret it the same way your brain has. Reality is a wholly unique one. In this way, it is impossible for any person to completely understand another person. Riches says, there is a saying in my country, you can teach a man who does not know, but you can never teach a man who does not want to know. This one is, which do you find more forgivable, cheating or murder? So this was inspired because I saw 1 in 4 say murder is more forgivable than cheating. Okay, so this was inspired, which is also funny. Okay, I have to say the other thing that I saw recently. But can I say this is inspired one more time? This was inspired by seeing a tweet that had to do with this guy. I think he was a YouTuber or TikToker who found out that his partner, the girlfriend, was cheating on him. I don't remember if they were married, and was cheating on him. And then when he found out, he killed her. And there were people that were saying, look, I don't condone either behavior. I don't want to say that I condone either behavior. However, if you cheat, what do you expect? So I'm like, and it reminds me of an article that I saw just yesterday that was this guy he committed a murder suicide against his wife because she was divorcing him. And so many of the comments on the cesspit of Twitter were like, well, she had it coming because she was divorcing him. Oh, well, the child that is now parentless can kick rocks. Well, if she didn't want to die, she shouldn't have tried to divorce him. What did you think was going to happen when you tried to take half his stuff? I don't think any of this was actually involved in the conversation. They just saw that a woman was divorcing her husband and they were like, she deserves to freaking die. So apparently, choices have been made. Choices have been made. Now, just so you know, murder is a specific thing. It's not like manslaughter. It is not self-defense. Murder is a legal term where there's premeditation involved. So Susan Foreman said, depends on the murderer. I dated a guy who was wanted by the police for murdering his stepfather because a stepdad was abusing his mother. And one day he went to go pick up a bike from a guy on Craigslist and never saw that boyfriend again. Anyways, I'm a lesbian now. Oh no. You know, this question is relevant to the circumstances kind of matter because I I can also see it. Okay, look, call me crazy. Obviously, if you've been around the channel, you know how I feel about cheating, which is going to obviously taint my perspective in general. That doesn't mean that obviously I'm going to just pick a murderer over a cheater every time. But I do think that reading about a murderer is easier for me to empathize with because I can also see reasons for murder that are not selfish or that are more sympathetic, whereas cheating is like always selfish. Just break up with your partner. But like, it's a hard question, and I'm sure that I'm going to get just dragged. Okay, it doesn't matter what I say. Idiot warning is going on right now. But I think of like Casey in Bodymore Zero, and if you look at his background, there is a murder in his background. He does he does kill somebody when he is 15 years old. And it's going to be up to you to determine whether or not that kill is justified or not. I don't think that it was personally the worst thing that he could have done. I think the victim had it coming. And I would choose Casey over a cheater, but I also wrote him. So, like, you can't trust my opinion on Casey. You'd have to, look, if you haven't read Bodymore Zero, please read Bodymore Zero. I can comp you a book, okay? Just, if you want to read it, there are places you can get it for free, like Book Sirens, and you can tell me how you feel about Casey. But, like, I could see places, like, a murder is ending a life, but, like, okay, the Casey situation, there's going to be spoilers in here really quick. It doesn't spoil the whole book. It just kind of tells you a little bit about Casey. But Casey killed his dad, and his dad raped and beat his mom all the time, and his dad beat him, and his dad threatened him, if you cross me, you're next. And so then he kind of grew up with a lot of resentment and fear for his dad, and then when he was big enough to fight his dad, he fought his dad to the death because he was a teenager filled with so much anger, so much resentment, and then he was like, this is a better death than the one that you gave mom. And then he took his dad somewhere. And so I'm like, look, I can't be mad at a kid that grew up in an abusive situation and then ended his abuser and ended the man who killed his mother. And his mother was the one who protected him. I can't be mad at that. And situationally, it does matter. Situationally, but I will say that if your book contains a cheater, if your main love interests or main character is a cheater and it's quirky because I don't no. Giant Mantis says, more forgivable and morally better are two different things. Murder can also come with mitigating circumstances, and murder can often be trusted not to murder again. That's true. But the only way a cheater doesn't cheat again is that they don't get the chance to have a 100% change of, or have a 100% change of mindset, which is not something I've seen more than a couple of times. Cody Hale YouTube says, in most cases, murder is objectively worse without question, LMAO, but as someone else pointed out, it can depend on who was murdered and why. There are some evil people out there after all. It's true. It's true, man. It's a complicated question, okay? And this one is because I couldn't just do men understand women. I had to do the opposite as well because I have to be fair, okay? And so we got do women understand men? And 31% say yes, and 69% say no, which interesting. This one also had fewer votes. Georgie says, I hate generalizations. This is not a constructive or sensitive question that could have been posed to open a discussion about gender dehumanization. It actually, if that's actually what it's trying to do. I mean, the comments section is open if you that's to encourage conversation. No one understands anyone. If we are generalized, women understand men because we are expected to. We are taught to empathize with them, with their plight, and see their experiences and achievements as default. I would I would guess that some men believe that women do not understand them because they forget that women are capable of the same rich inner lives as them. And you can even see examples of this mentality in other comments. Women don't know true loneliness, women are bad communicators, etc. Nearly everyone oversimplifies. Women can be more empathetic on whole for exact the reason that you said, and all of the unpaid labor, but most women are shown the experiences of some men and encouraged to empathize with those whose stories turn a profit, and things can get ugly when you step outside of familiar grounds beyond men they know. Personally, I ended up in the BDSM community simply because of how disgusting almost everyone else was handling a man with a fight or flight or freeze sex phobia since childhood. That community can still understand the complications of consent, at least, even better than a corporate news, despite what 50 Shades of Grey may have you believe. Because answering the same question about why I let myself be raped, it was bad enough hearing it from my rapist after she did it, thanks. No sadist can hurt me as bad as the last social worker I spoke to. You can't talk about how much you understand men and then accuse us of thinking that you're not capable of having rich inner lives. Kind of talk like someone who would choose the bear and not see it as an insult. Like, this is when it starts getting to somebody is saying something because of the perspective that they have, the experiences that they have, and then it's turning into an insult, and then it's turning into another insult instead of becoming a sort of conversation to understand where people are coming from. And yes, it is a generalization. The question is a generalization, which is meant to pose a situation to give us more specific responses that are going to be flavored with your specific experiences and perspectives. And again, the specific experiences and perspectives, how often have you seen those be shared? And there are specific, and then it's used as an insult or as a denigration to a greater number as the generalization when you're actually talking about an individual. I know that I've seen it happen when I'm talking about books where I'll be criticizing something in a book and I'll say, these are the reasons why in this book it doesn't work. And then I'm told, well, what about this? What about this? It works in all these other situations. I'm like, I'm not talking about other situations. I'm talking about this one. I've also seen it in articles or somebody is talking about their experience with something, and then somebody else goes, but that's not my experience, and I also call myself a thing, or I also belong to X community. And so it can get really hard when you're expressing a specific perspective to not try to, you're not trying to be insulting, but you're going to end up saying something that may not be as clean as other people want it to be because you're expressing a perspective. And instead of inquiring why you think that or what experiences you've had for that, it's, oh, you're insulting other people because you've said it that way. Another one would be the book that it was the article that had to do with the nonfiction novel or the nonfiction memoir that was by the teacher that got everybody in the publishing industry that was around it in trouble because of some of her descriptions, like talking about the kid with the chocolate skin or mentioning the Romani girl who had a unibrow, or the way that she described the Jewish girl. I think that it was something like that. But people just didn't like the way that she described it. But it was a memoir. So she was expressing her ideas and her thoughts, and sometimes they're ugly. And it was the same, I think it was that article as well that talked about somebody who worked as an OBGYN and how dehumanized it made the subjects that it was talking about. But that's kind of something that you have to do when you work in those fields in order to talk about those serious subjects. And you're not trying to. But when you're talking about personal subjects, you're going to end up saying things in a specific way, and you don't necessarily, one, know what you don't know, and that goes on both sides, and you don't know what somebody else is going to read into what you say. So you have to bring patience to any of these conversations in order to not just jump on people. And it's very difficult. So many people are more ready to assume malicious intent on other people than to just like listen and see where somebody is coming from. And it's scary because then you're like, well, when am I going to get jumped on? Let's end on this one. What matters more? Good storytelling / entertainment at 91% and morally or ethically correct beliefs by the creator at 9%. And this is another hot button issue that kind of comes up every so often in the conversations that can feel, I think, really, really heated and very much in one direction. But it seems like it is the actual opposite direction as to what actually tends to happen when you're in conversation. Because I also think that you're at more of a risk of some sort of vulnerability when you're in conversation as opposed to like a poll where you can just kind of express meh. So some of these comments are, maybe I don't want to support a morally bankrupt creator financially, but if they make good stuff, I will respect it for what it is. Morals, says morals of the author matter more than when I'm deciding to pick up a book. If I know for sure that the author's values don't mesh with mine, I'm probably not seeking books by the author in the first place. However, storytelling and entertainment matter more if I find out later that the author of a favorite book is a jerk. I'm not going to sit here and say that a book I've loved for 10 years is suddenly awful because the author kicked a baby. I mean, you can just go, dang it, I cannot know. Why do you do this to me? I want to know the least amount about individual creators because sometimes they're delightful, but then sometimes you're like, I wish I didn't know. I wish I didn't take it back. And that maybe that's irresponsible, but HPG Wellscraft says, I think creators' beliefs are going to come through in their work no matter what. How could they not? Nebu Fabu says it depends. There is such a thing as a good story being told by bad people, but they're best read at least 100 years after they were written. I did talk about a book on this channel called Killer Fiction, and it was by a killer here in Florida. He was corresponding with some chick he went to high school with, and then she wrote it down and published stuff that he told her. And it's like, there is a line. Like, I have obviously read stuff that it's like, you've actually not just thought some horrible things, but you have done some things. I think we all have a line. I think we all have a line where we'll also be like interest level. I think we also have a moral line that is going to be different for one another. And I think it is personally important to not like browbeat other people based on those lines because we're all going to have different lines. And then there's also, like, this person says, Lovecraft was not a good dude on a personal level, but that's some darn good cosmic horror. But, like, didn't you hear it so often when Lovecraft's name comes up that he became a better person later on in life as he reevaluated his beliefs and he changed, but that's never part of the conversation. So then, like, how much of that do you also bring in? It feels like generally when I hear about people, you only ever hear about them being terrible or becoming terrible, but you never hear about them becoming better people. But it's not like it doesn't happen. There are a few authors out there that are absolutely bad people, that it's mostly good storytelling entertainment, but if they are horrible people, then I won't support them in any way. This is why the first Joker did amazing. Oh, you know the answer. It's consuming product and then getting excited for the next product. Duh. I say the morality thing. I don't know how to word it properly, so basically my entertainment comes second. I'm not about the jangling keys life. Anyway, those are some of the answers, some of the questions that you guys posed. Some of the, I want to say some of the bravery, because it takes a certain level of being willing to be vulnerable to answer questions that are like this. So if you guys want to see us go over more of these questions, and I'm going to keep trying to come up with questions to drop on the community tab, because I think they're really interesting. Let me know if you would like another one of these in the future, because there are so many more question tabs to go to, and I thought that we would go over them, so you just didn't feel like ignored, and I think they're interesting. If you didn't get a chance to answer any of these in the past, or if your answer might have changed from listening to some of the other opinions, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments down below. Please feel free to share your thoughts. I will not argue. I'm here to listen to different perspectives. With that said, look, if my opinion on the murder cheating thing is out of line, like go ahead, but I'm team Casey, and it's not just because he's hot, okay? With that said, have a great weekend and don't die.
Was that Wayland Cross in the trunk? Do you know, or is that something that's still being figured out? The person in the trunk was not Wayland Cross. Is he in trouble? We don't know who did it, but as the owner of the car, the longer he's missing, the worse it looks for him. Cross isn't a killer. For the last couple of years, the average number of murders in Baltimore has been over 300, and it's been going up. Mind you, that's only whatever the badges count as official murder, and believe me, there are people that don't count when they die. Wayland? If you're down here, tell me. I'm not talking to the badges, I've been looking for you. They found a body in your trunk. Way. Why? Did you do that? To the left, plain black letters read along the wall. You walked in the corridor. Once that ends, you chose the dark is on the right. My vision goes blurry, flickers black and black and black for longer intervals until I can't see anything at all. I'm not screaming anymore, but my voice echoes back to me. Where the hell am I? You're dead, Josephine. Even smart people do stupid shit sometimes, right?